I've looked at a very large number of terrible things, both in my studies and in my personal life and in my private practice. And my conclusion has been that despite the vast ocean of ignorance that we all swim in and the overwhelming proclivity for malevolence that characterizes the human psyche, that the nobility that's part and parcel of us and the potential can transcend that and defeat it. And so it's very dark, but there's something very bright at the bottom. And so I'm very optimistic about that, and that's part of the reason that that I wrote the book that I wrote, but also that I'm touring around the world talking to people about adopting something approximating a vision that's noble and worthy, and setting their speech straight and getting their lives together and shouldering the responsibility of the world in a manner that's good for them and their family and their communities, and to think about that as an aspirational goal that provides them with the meaning to offset the tragedy of their life. And I believe that's solid, right to the core. And my impression is that it's that knowing that, hearing that, which is something that all people already know in some sense, but hearing that articulated clearly is of great utility to people. And every time someone comes up to me, and this happens very often, multiple times a day, no matter where I am, and someone comes up to me and says, excuse me, are you Dr. Peterson? And they usually say that very politely, and they're apologetic for disturbing me, even though they're not disturbing me. They say, look, I was having a rough time a couple of years ago, addicted, alcoholic, lonesome, disturbed in my personal relationships. I've been watching your lectures, listening to your books, listening to your podcasts. Things are much better. Thank you. It's like every time that happens, it's overwhelming. I'm sorry it always breaks me up, but it's very overwhelming. You see, it's very overwhelming to have strangers come up and tell you things that they won't tell people that are close to them. You know, it indicates that they trust, that there's a trust there, that's deep trust, because the people who are doing this, they come up and tell me that because they're very pleased about it, but also because they know that I'll be pleased about it. And I am overwhelmingly pleased about it. And so, and for me, every time I hear something like that, that's a victory. You know, I studied the structure of totalitarianism for a very long time and became a very firm believer in the idea of good and evil. And I do believe that the most appropriate way to conceptualize the nature of human experience is as a battle between good and evil. And I think it's a very serious battle because the evil is very dark and very terrible. And every time I see someone who has reoriented themselves in an upward direction, then I regard that as part of what defeats that terrible malevolence and bitterness. And I believe that the fundamental doctrine that each individual is a center of creation, I believe that to be literally and metaphorically true. And I also believe that each of us participate in the process of transforming what could be into what is, and that we do that as a consequence of our ethical choices, and that we shape the world as a consequence of that. And so then when I hear someone come up to me and say, look, you know, I've done everything I could in the last while to put myself together, and it's much less dark around me, I think. That's one more major victory on the bitter road uphill.
If you could give one advice to us how we could be able to actually put our opinion out there and to actually make people listen and not to cause some mindless conflict with just yelling, what advice would you give us?
Learn to write. I'm dead serious. Like, I'm dead serious about that. because writing is formalized thinking. And so the way you write is, first of all, you need a problem. Because why write if you don't have a problem? So this is good advice if you're just writing an essay, by the way, for your classes. It's like, pick a bloody problem that you want to write about, because otherwise it's false right from the start. It's up to you to engage with the material until you find something that grips you, that you desire to investigate. Okay, so you need a problem. Well, the next thing you need to do is, well, you need to have something to say about the problem. Well, so, reading. Reading is really good for that. Read as much as you can. Get your hands on that addresses the problem. Okay, so now you know a bunch of things, or at least provisionally know them. You at least have access to them. Well, now you start sorting through it. It's like, okay, well, maybe I need to summarize what I've learned, and then I need to iron out the contradictions between what I've learned, and I need to elegantly formulate that, and I need to get my word choice right, and my phrase choice right, and my sentence choice right, and I need to organize the sentences into proper paragraphs, and the paragraphs into proper sequence, so that I have a coherent argument. And at the same time, what you're doing is you're integrating your own personality at the highest and most abstract level of organization, and you're sharpening your tools, and you're putting yourself straight, because you're learning to think. You learn to do that by writing. And so I would say, pick some hard problems and learn to write very, very carefully. And when I say pay attention to the word, I mean that. Pick the right words. Organize them into the right phrases. Get your sentences straight. Like when I wrote my first book, Maps of Meaning, I believe I wrote every sentence in that book 50 times. 50 variants of every sentence. I'd read it once, I'd read it again, I'd read it again, I'd read it again, and I'd have a little competition. Which sentence is better? Which sentence is better? I'd pick that sentence. Do the same with the paragraphs. Over many, many years, you hone your words. They're the most powerful thing about you, bar none. If you are an effective writer and speaker and communicator, you have all the authority and competence that there is. And so you're at university. Maybe you're taking a humanities degree. Well, what's the humanities degree for? It's to teach you how to think. You learn to think by writing. Now there's more to read, to speak, and all of that, but the best thing you can do is read and write every day. A couple of hours every day. Write about things you find important, and see if you can discover what you believe to be true. And that'll build you a foundation. And it's unbelievably practical. Like if you look at people who are phenomenally successful across life, there's various reasons, but one of them is that they're unbelievably good at articulating what they're aiming at, and strategizing and negotiating and enticing people with a vision forward. It's like, get your words together, man. That makes you unstoppable. And that's the core of the humanities, that idea. Get your words together. Make yourself an articulate creature, and then you're deadly in the best possible way. You students, you might think in your more cynical moments that you have to offer your professors what they want and gerrymander the content of your language to suit their predilections, or what you consider to be their predilections. First of all, it's a very small minority of professors who are corrupt enough to punish you for producing a high-quality essay that they don't agree with. And though that's reprehensible, but it doesn't happen very often. But more importantly, it's the highest academic sin to do that. Because what you're here to do is to learn to find your true voice. And every time you deviate from that for expedient reasons, you corrupt yourself. And not in a trivial way, because when you formulate your arguments, that becomes a permanent part of your character. You carry that with you. It becomes part of the structure through which you view the world, and it guides your actions. And so you hold your words pristine, and you work in a dedicated way to become as articulate and clear as you can possibly become. And there's nothing that's more practical and noble than that at the same time. That's why the humanities are so valuable. You think, well, what good is a humanities degree? It's like, well, you come out of here able to speak and think and write, no matter where you go, like you're headed for the pinnacle, and hopefully in a way that's positive for everyone. So that's what I would recommend.
Lindor, made to melt you by the Lint Master Chocolatier.
I've done about 150 public lectures or so in the last year all over the world. And to large audiences, the audiences in Australia were starting to approach, well, we had audiences of 5,500 people in Australia. So, which is quite remarkable, you know, that 5,500 people would come to listen to like a serious discussion about philosophical, theological, and psychological issues, and to participate in that. And I don't pull up any punches. I'm not speaking down. I would never speak down to an audience. I think that's a dreadful error of arrogance. But the reason that I think people believe what I say is that I'm very pessimistic. Well, look, because most times when you listen to someone who's a motivational speaker, let's say, you know, it fills you with a temporary optimism, but you go home and the wiser part of you knows that mostly it's the painting over of rotten wood with a fresh coat of paint. And I tell my audiences very clearly that their life is going to be difficult, and sometimes difficult beyond both imagining and tolerance, and that is definitely in your future. If it isn't in your present, and for many people it's in their present, and that can be unbearable, that enough to turn you against life itself, to corrupt you, to drive you to nihilism, to drive you to suicide, and worse, to drive you to thoughts of vengefulness, of infinite scope, to not only be turned against yourself and your fellow men, but to be turned against being itself because of its intrinsically brutal, in some sense, nature. And that is worse than that, actually, because it's not only that we suffer, and that will necessarily occur, but that we all make our suffering worse because of our ignorance and our malevolence. And everyone knows that to be true. And so the discussions start, let's say, on an unshakable foundation. But then I can tell people, look, despite that, we're remarkable creatures. You know, we're capable of taking up the burden of that suffering and facing the reality of that malevolence voluntarily. We can actually do that. And all of the psychological evidence suggests, and this is independent of your school of psychology, if you're a practical psychologist, a clinical psychologist of any sort, the evidence is crystal clear that if people voluntarily confront the problems that face them and the malevolence that surrounds them, that they can make headway against it. And not only psychologically, so it's not only meaningful to do that psychologically, which it is, to confront the problems that torment you voluntarily, that's meaningful psychologically, but it's also practically useful in that you can actually solve some of the problems that beset you. When I talk to undergraduates, I ask them, you know, how much time do you waste every day by your own reckoning? And it's somewhere between 5 and 8 hours. You know, it's a lot of time. Well, I usually walk the students through an economic analysis of that. I said, well, you know, why don't you value your time at $50 an hour and calculate for yourself just exactly what you're doing to your future by your inability to discipline yourself. It's worth thinking through. In any case, people do waste a lot of time, and they also act counterproductively a lot of the time. Regardless, we do make progress, and and we can thrive under the difficult conditions that make up our lives, and we can resist the malevolence that entices us. That's within our power, and we don't know the limits to that. And we also know that it's better to, we all know this, that it's better to live courageously than cowardly. Everyone knows that. That's what you teach people that you love. And we know that it's better to live truthfully than in deceit. And you can tell that too, because that's also what you tell people that you love. And we know that you should pick up your damn responsibility and move forward. Everyone knows that. It's part of our intrinsic moral nature. And that nature is there. And it's not difficult to communicate to people about this. Like, everyone knows that you wake up at 3 in the morning when you've let your life go off the rails, and that you berate yourself for your uselessness and your cruelty and your failure to take the opportunities that are in front of you. And if you were the master in your own house, in some sense, the captain of your own destiny, if there was no intrinsic nature, well, that would never happen. You'd just let yourself off the hook. There'd be no voice of conscience tormenting you. But no one escapes from that. And what that indicates to me is that, at least psychologically, we live in a universe that's characterized by a moral dimension, and we understand that well, and that moral failings have consequences, and that they're not trivial. They destroy you. They destroy your family. They destroy your community. And you can tell people that, and they listen because they know. They don't know they know. That's the thing, and maybe that's the thing about being an intellectual. You have the opportunity to articulate ideas that other people know, they embody, but they can't articulate. And that's what people tell me. They say, well, you help me give words to things that I always knew to be true but couldn't say. Or they say, I'd be trying to put some of your precepts into practice. Responsibility being a main one, vision another, honesty, I suppose, bringing up the pack and saying, and this is the fun part of doing all of this. Fun is a weak word. That it's the remarkable part of doing all this. I mean, I have people tell me constantly wherever I go, it's so delightful that, they were in a pretty dark place, and they tell me why. And there's plenty of dark places in the world, and they decided, well, maybe they were going to develop a bit of a vision and take a bit more responsibility and start telling the truth and putting some effort into something. And they come up and they say, well, you can't believe how much better things are. It's like, I got 3 promotions. I had one guy tell me, this was a lovely story, 15 seconds. He came up after a talk. He said, 2 years ago, I got out of jail. I was homeless. He said, I own my own house. I have a 6-figure income. I got married and I have a daughter. Thank you. And that was the whole conversation. It's like he decided he was going to put his life together. And and so you can look at that pessimism that constitutes, let's say, the core of what, well, I think it's the core religious message, really, is the tragic nature of the world, the reality of suffering. It's part of the core religious message. But what emerges out of that, properly conceptualized, is a remarkable appreciation for what human beings are capable of. Like, we are unbelievably resilient and able creatures, and we do not have any conception of our upper limits. I would say for the last 45 years, we've told, psychologists have been certainly to blame for this, at least in part, you're okay the way you are. That's what we tell young people. Oh, you're okay the way you are. It's like, and there's nothing worse than you can tell that you can tell someone who's young than that, especially if they're miserable. You know, and lots of them, well, if they're miserable and aimless, it's like, oh, I'm miserable and aimless, and sometimes I'm suicidal and I'm nihilistic and I don't have any direction in your life. In my life. It's like, well, you're okay the way you are here. And it's like, they don't want to hear that. They want to hear, look, you know, and you know this, you're useless. You know nothing. You haven't got started. You've got 60 years to put yourself together, and God only knows what you could become. And that message is so much more, it's so funny because it's such an attack, but it's so positive because there's faith there in the potential that makes up the person rather than the miserable actuality that happens to be manifesting itself at the moment. And young people respond extraordinarily well to that because, and you know that if you're a parent and you love your child, your son, your daughter, what you're trying to foster is the best in them. You want that to manifest itself across the course of their life. You want them to become continually more than they are, to see what they could be. And well, and I think that's part of the great message of the West, is that's the ethical requirement of individual being in the proper sense, is to constantly note that you're not what you could be, to take responsibility for that, and to commit yourself, like body and soul, to the attainment of that ideal. My hierarchy would be something like this. I type letters, I type words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs. I sequence the paragraphs, I make chapters, I write books. It's all coherently laid out towards some higher order aim, all of that. And the aim is, as far as I'm concerned, to share my clinical knowledge and to educate people. And that makes sense because I'm a clinician and a researcher and a professor, and so if I was going to do that, I've decided I'm going to do that, so that's what I'm doing. And hopefully that's a good thing. And hopefully people respond to it as if it's a good thing, because then that's a good thing for me and it's a good thing for them. And so that seems to be like the very definition of a good thing. And I'm trying to set things straight, right? I'm trying to set myself straight by writing carefully. I'm trying to set the culture straight by saying what I believe to be the case. I'm trying to set other individuals straighter by communicating with them. I'm trying to ensure that we can live more harmoniously in our culture and in the world. And you think, well, those are good things to have at the outermost reaches of your value hierarchy. You know, my friend of mine was talking to me about bricklayers the other day, and he's trying to restructure a major company at the moment. And we were talking about how to motivate people. He said, well, let's say you're a bricklayer. It's like, you know, one damn brick after another. How are you going to be excited about that? Well, let's say you're a medieval bricklayer, right? And it's 1500, and you're working in one of the great early Renaissance cities in Europe. And it isn't a wall you're building; it's a cathedral. It's going to take 350 years. And why are you doing that? Well, it's for the ultimate glory of God, whatever that means. And so you're not putting one brick down after another. It's like you're involved in this unbelievably complicated moral structure that stretches all the way up to heaven itself, so to speak. And each of your minor actions, you know, your local actions, is imbued with the spirit of that entire moral structure. Well, that's a philosophy. It's like, well, do you have a meaning in life? What's the meaning of life? Well, hopefully it isn't just unrequited suffering and malevolence. We could dispense with that as much as possible. That might be a good start. But then to aim high, well, that seems to be reasonable. To aim as high as you can. And we've laid out things that could be aimed at. You could constrain yourself, you know. There are things you're not doing and things that you shouldn't be doing. You stop doing the things that you shouldn't be doing and start doing the things you should be doing. That's a good start. Wake up enough so that you can set the structures around you right. It's your moral obligation as a citizen, your responsibility, and your divine duty, I would say, from our cultural perspective, because in the West, everyone is regarded as a sovereign individual, the fate of the state, a sovereign individual on whose shoulders rests the fate and the health of the state. Right? That's the fundamental presupposition. Otherwise, well, why do you get to vote? Just to make a mistake? Well, no, that's not it. You're supposed to be awake so that the ship of state continues to move forward in the appropriate direction. And somehow we've decided that's up to you. Why? Well, because we've also decided, hey man, you can do it. And not only that, no one else can. And so that's something to know and might be something to take seriously. It's like, who knows what the hell you'd be if you got your act together.
Soaring prices, mass shortages. What's next? Hi, I'm Chris Hurt here, and if you're like most people, you may have noticed some strange things popping up in the news lately, because once again the word crisis is being thrown around, and yet this is unlike.
You'd be a force to contend with, you know? You'd have constrained the malevolence in your own soul, and you'd have started to take advantage of the potential that's around you, and to build yourself out of that potential into God only knows what, you know? And then maybe with that wisdom you can set the structures around you in order, at least more in order than they are, or maybe to disintegrate them a bit when they need it and to restructure them so they're even better than they are. And you can push back nature in its horrible form and invite it forward in its positive form and make things better for you and for your family and for your community. And you can approach the unknown itself and you can explore that, the potential that's out there. And you can bring back the treasure that's part of the unknown potential. And you can distribute that. And that is what you can do. And then not only that's what you need to do, because you need to have a meaning in your life, an aim, a value structure that's of sufficient potency and magnitude to justify the limitations and the trouble that life constitutes, right? This is no trivial business that we're involved in, right? We're all in this up to our necks, literally. It's a mortal game. You're all in. And to play it wrong is to risk suffering and hell. And I'm not talking about afterlife. I'm not talking about something metaphysical. You can generate plenty of hell right here around you. Plenty. An unlimited amount. And so you can move towards that direction, or you can move towards a positive direction. And you can orient yourself. And you can learn. This is why the postmodernists are so incorrect. It's like, look, you need an aim. You need an aim. You cannot organize the way you look at the world without an aim. It's not optional. And then the question is, well, what should the aim be? Well, probably not to radically increase the amount of misery and suffering that you experience in everyone else. I mean, maybe you want to go that route, but... And people do, but I think they only do when they become bitter and they give up, you know? And they make mistakes they know they're making, right? It's conscious decision to go down that route. It's not like they think that's okay to begin with. Their aim's wrong. It's like, straighten out your aim. So there's an old idea, this idea of sin. Sin is a word that was derived from a Greek word, hamartia. And hamartia is an archery term, and it means to miss the target. And so you think, well, how can you miss the target? Well, you have no weapon. Well, then you miss the target. You have no target. You have no aim. Well, then you miss the target. You don't pick up your bow. Well, then you miss the target. You don't draw it back. Then you miss the target. You don't practice and miss many times, right? Because you have to do that to develop the skill to hit the target. So you're not willing to take the risk to miss. You do none of that. And so you miss the target. And that's the sin. And then you miss your life. And then what happens around you is that, well, there's far more hell than there has to be, and there's much less heaven than there could be. And it's on you. And that's part of your, what would you say, your divine value, let's say, that sets you aside, along with everyone else, as something, someone, some being that even the law itself has to respect intrinsically. And it's marked out in our culture by the sovereignty that you possess, and the notion that there's something in you that's made in the image of God, something that can confront the unknown and to create habitable order out of chaos and potential, and to do that properly. And that's all true as far as I can tell. And it's all necessary to know. It's coded in the deepest stories that are at the base of our culture. And we're in danger of not understanding them and not believing them. And it's a big mistake because they're heavy and profound and weighty and fundamental and necessary, because you have to stand on something that's solid, or everything is sand and you fall in and you're done. And so is everything around you. You can't look at the world without an aim. Literally. You can't even perceive it. You cannot regulate your emotions without an aim. The better your aim, the more precise your aim, the more elevated your aim. Remember in Pinocchio, when Geppetto wants to turn Pinocchio into a real boy, he wishes on a star. It's a strange thing, eh? But everybody just accepts it. It's like, well, yeah, if you've got a puppet, you just made a puppet, and you want to turn it into a boy, the logical thing to do is open the window and wish on a star. Everyone knows that. It's like, none of that makes the least bit of sense, obviously, except metaphorically, but we do understand it because we can watch that, and it makes sense. There's something magical about it. And there is something magical about it. Because the truth of the matter is that if you want to transform something that's nothing but a wooden-headed puppet into something that's a fully functional, autonomous, moral, autonomous individual, then what you do is you elevate your eyes above the horizon to the highest point of light that you can perceive, and you aim at that. And that works. And that works for you, and it works for your partner, and it works for your children, and it works for the world.
$453,000.
All right, everybody, we did a half an hour of yoga this morning, so thank you all for being here. I appreciate all of your positive energy and positive comments. I appreciate all your follows. Thank you all for being here. So this morning we were listening to a YouTube video called How to Become the Most Powerful Version of Yourself by Jordan Peterson. Now, Jordan Peterson is a motivational speaker who is, let me see what else this is tagged with. Success Chasers, Motivation. It's got about 500,000 views. It was published March 1st on 2021. So if you all are looking for the rest of that video, you can check it out by Jordan Peterson, How to Become the Most Powerful Version of Yourself. So thanks for being here. I'm going to post this on YouTube here shortly. What I do after my lives is I create another live tomorrow, because I do it every day at 8 a.m. It being yoga and listening to a motivational speech. That's been something I've been doing recently. This stretch and breathe thing has been working for me. I'm finding it's creating a routine and good healthy habits for me. So if you all are looking to get good healthy habits too, I encourage you all to tune in at 8 and do whatever it is that you need to do for yourself to put yourself on track. You know, so for me, I have a hard time focusing and you're gonna laugh, breathing through tough things sometimes. So I push myself to do a little bit of stretching and breathing and push myself out of my comfort zone, and I do it every day. So thanks for coming. Want to show out for me. I don't know what Jacker Jackson means, but good morning. Hello, Nellie Wan. Thanks for tuning in. Do you listen to Abraham Hicks at all? Honestly, when I search on YouTube for motivational speaker, I just looked at the suggested things on the side. You know how when you look on YouTube, you have that thing. It's like, here's your video and here's everything that's suggested. So I go down the suggestions and just go right down. I'm looking for something that's about 30 minutes. I'm like, do I have anything left? Okay, thanks for being here. You guys may have seen the plant cage behind me. It's fun, right? So I'm Megan of Megan's Plant Boutique. So what I do is I sell plants, I sell mystery boxes, cuttings, propagation kits, driftwood planters. I give propagation tips. I am somebody who is a whiz with diagnosing plant problems. I can ID plants. But if you are looking for gifts for this gifting season, you guys can catch 20% off on my website. It's megansplantboutique.com. All you have to do is click the link in my bio and you will be right there. My best seller is my 7 mystery cuttings. People tend to love the variety that I have in there, and I kind of mix it up every time. People wonder if I do the same mystery box every time. I don't, but I do have a few staples that I do like to make sure everybody gets. I find there are a few plants that not everybody has, and I like to put them in the boxes for everybody, and people tend to love it. And they love my packaging. The way I package is like a gift, so I use lots of crinkle paper, colorful tissue papers, and people open it up and they're just like, so I've gotten a few 5-star reviews in the past couple days where people are just absolutely blown away by the way I package my plants. So I may post those here on my TikTok here soon because I just love the positive feedback from people. I do love beautiful comments as well, so I'll take that compliment. Thank you, Huntimal. Cactus, succulents, or just tropicals. So in my shop, I do a few things. So I have some cactus, some succulents, and some tropicals, and some houseplants. I have a lot of things in my shop. So if you haven't checked it out, just click the link in my bio. You'll see a lot of what I have available. Right now I do have some Stapelia in there. Those are Zulu giants. They make cool starfish cactus, like they make flowers this big. I'm not kidding. And the cactus is like that big. This is a fairy castle right here. That one's a cactus. A Stapelia is actually a succulent. Do you have pitcher plants? I actually don't have any carnivorous plants right now. So pitcher plant is a carnivorous plant, as well as like the Venus flytraps and things like that. I don't have those. They don't have much success here in Florida, just from what I've found. For whatever reason, it's just either I'm not properly caring for them, or I haven't figured out how to properly care for them, or they ain't like in Florida. So no pitcher plants here right now anyway. I'm working on some night blooming cactus. I should be listing that here soon. I may have listed it on plantsplease.com. I'm not sure. But most of my listings are over on Etsy. So if you click the link in my bio, you will be over on my Etsy shop. And I have a website too. It's megansplantboutique.com. I have an Instagram. I have a Facebook. I have a Twitter. I have a YouTube. So if you want to find me somewhere else, I'm there too. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to call it a day, and we are going to do some more yoga tomorrow. Hope you liked Max. He was here the whole time during yoga, and we will come back tomorrow, check in and do more stretching and breathing.